Tell us a little bit about yourself.
My name's Andrew. I'm 35 years old.
Hey, my name is Amir Norvak.
I'm Sam, 18 years old. Just finished high school.
My name's Larissa Jones. Just came here yesterday.
I'm Emily. I'm 17, 18 in a month.
What's your background?
Ethnic background?
Yeah.
French, Canadian, and English.
So I'm Dutch on one side and American on the other.
I'm a big mix of things. I am Maltese, I'm British, I'm Ukrainian, and I'm Norwegian.
I was born in Iran, grew up in Paris, and then Toronto.
So when you think of Canadian, what comes to mind? Like, how do you define Canadian?
It's literally just like maple syrup, bears, forests and lakes, and a lot of off-grid places. Yeah.
I guess we're an immigrant nation.
A lot of the time that has to do with the stereotypes we have, and like those kind of things do come to mind, but especially living in a place like Toronto where there is so much diversity and there are so many different kinds of people, it really, I don't know.
Everything. That's pretty much it. That you can be from anywhere and everywhere and be Canadian. It's more of, to me, it's more of an ideal rather than a geography or based on race, color, or anything.
I know Toronto as a city is rated one of the most multicultural cities on earth. I heard something about over 50% of Torontonians were not born in Canada.
So do you identify as Canadian?
Definitely, yeah.
Okay.
There are like sort of two dimensions to the Canadian identity. There's the one that Canada really wants to put forward, which is the whole idea of multiculturalism, which is really prominent here. I haven't been to a lot of places outside Toronto, but I'm sure there's a very different culture that pervades across most of Canada that isn't as, isn't what we'd see on the streets of Toronto.
Yeah.
So I think there are definitely different dimensions to the identity.
What do you think about multiculturalism in Canada?
Well, I can tell you what I feel about it in London. Canada, I noticed that it was very diverse when I came here last April. Definitely all different types of like food outlets. It seems there's something for everyone. Who knows when it comes to economy and social? I don't know. I can't really say.
It's a hard one to define. I would define multiculturalism as the ability to have your own culture and heritage within an overlying community that shares similar ideals, but not necessarily similar cultures.
I think everybody uses it as an ideal, and I definitely think in Toronto we like, everybody really likes to say that they're multicultural, but I think to see it in practice is a little more of a complicated thing.
I guess the way multiculturalism is used in media is almost always used in a positive way. It's a good aspect of Canada. May not necessarily, every single person may not necessarily hold those same views, but in the public sphere, I guess they use it in the same ways the media does.
I think right now kids don't look at each other and think about the color of the other person's skin first, at our age, especially in our generation. So if you put them together, they will interact and they will, they'll be friends.
So within that context of multiculturalism and being in Toronto and Canada, what does identity then mean?
Do you mean how do I identify myself?
We form our self-concept based on the groups that we identify with. So, I think we have these levels of groups, communities that we're involved in that are a huge part of who we think we are.
I guess like most people anywhere in the world, they look back at their history, their ethnicity, use things like this to define themselves. To be honest, I don't really think it's a big deal in Canada. I don't consider it a big deal. If myself, I would just say I'm a Canadian. I wouldn't choose my ethnic background as a defining feature of me over the fact that I am a Canadian.
One, two.
How's my hair? Is it okay?
Gorgeous.
Thanks.
Shiny.
My name is Sahar.
I'm Husam Salim.
Hi, my name is Rose Goulet.
My name is Osborne Farrell. I'm a youth employment counselor here at Ms. AB.
What is my background? Well, that's a good question.
I'm from Nipissing First Nation, which is just outside of the North Bay area on the north shore of Lake Nipissing.
I grew up in Toronto, and my name is Persian with an Arabic origin. I also have Chinese origin, so the pronunciation of my name in Chinese is Tu Siu Siu.
My parents are from Uganda, my dad, and my mother's from Tanzania. I was actually born in Quebec, but I moved to Kenya, then I moved to Ottawa, then I moved to Kenya, and now I'm back in Toronto.
I'm Aboriginal and African Canadian. My father came from a place in Nova Scotia called Africville, which is a historic site in itself. And I have an Aboriginal mom.
How do you feel multiculturalism, the word and the idea, is used in Canada?
There's several, I think there's different narratives or different attitudes towards multiculturalism.
I think the word multiculturalism in Canada is a twisted word. It comes in one way from a place of beauty where there's a lot to embrace in terms of diversity, in terms of richness of people's backgrounds, but at the same time in many spaces it can be considered a myth where we're talking about something that doesn't actually exist.
Multiculturalism in Canada, as people, Canadians are always seen as this very tolerant society, very liberal society, but it's politically correct in the incorrect ways, as much of an oxymoron as that seems.
Multiculturalism, yes, but as long as they're living harmoniously, then you can give it that label, the multicultural, capital of the world, they say Toronto is. And but you got to be very careful.
It's a feel-good term just to pat ourselves on the back saying, oh, we're multicultural, we're Canada, so that's fine. That's all we have to do, and we don't really have to actually look past that barrier and just sort of see the reality for what it actually is.
I believe dominant multiculturalism has actually been used to mask the crimes and is actually used to create a space to actually not actively engage in these historical crimes. It says we exist in a post-racial society where it creates facades of sort of blindness, of color blindness, and doesn't actively seek to include those stories of the oppressed, but rather see multiculturalism as from the voice of from the dominators, and I think that's very dangerous.
It's a term that I embrace as my identity, but I realize that often in spaces that it can be seen as something that gives one definition to a very complex thing. When we're saying we need to incorporate multiculturalism, it has to go beyond just representation, but voices of people actually being heard and being involved in communities.
What does identity mean to you personally?
Identity,
Identity is really a knowledge of the self, and trying to understand who I am in relation to my peers, in relation to my family, in relation to my country or my so-called city.
Identity is something pretty sure anybody that comes from a mixed heritage somewhat struggles with that type of identity. There was this, I guess an internal struggle when you feel, you're amongst black people and you're more fair skinned than them. They automatically assume they know you're mixed. And the same thing with, the Aboriginal culture, knowing that, I'm a little bit darker, my hair is a little bit thicker than theirs, and obviously, that there's an African side to me. And I guess the embracing didn't happen in my younger years. I used to live on a reserve out in Nova Scotia, and I wasn't embraced culturally speaking, racism. I faced lots of racism.
identity is a complicated question for me and for my family. Not only did I move around between here and Kenya, but it's always been a big question because my parents came from mixed backgrounds, coming from having Yemeni blood, as many did in our community. In fact, our whole community has some degree of Yemeni blood, but their parents came from Yemen, and so they were never fully accepted as Yemeni or as Arabs sometimes, and not really recognized, always othered as well in their communities, seen as other, but with a sort of a different power relationship, that they were better, but never quite African enough. So, trying to assert that self has been difficult. So with regards to me, it's a big question mark.
My identity will always be a dual type of outlook. I'll never ever say that I'm just Aboriginal or I'm just black. I actually embrace it now. So when I came here, it was different. It was really different. People weren't staring at me when I was walking into a store, or it was just it was really, and not to say that I didn't face racism here in the city of Toronto. We still face racism. I still face racism actually to this day.
So identity means to me being able to know my history, being able to speak my language, knowing that there are other people who are knowledge keepers that I can turn to when I want to explore my identity.
The identities that I would say I embrace are still very much fluid and in movement. I very much identify as someone who's multicultural, multiracial, multi-ethnic.
Also being represented in narrative as well, so any sort of history or curriculum or anything in school that's sort of passed around as being this narrative of Canada. I'd like to see my identity being faithfully represented. And to me, I would say my identities are First Nations, Nipissing, learner, reader, hiker, and outdoors person.
I find that as someone who was born here but has family who immigrated here and learned about the history of our country, what was missing was understanding the realities of the founding people of this land. And it's really important for them to come together because many of the systems of racism, sexism, that are creating difficult living circumstances for newcomers are also part of the same problematic systems that oppress
Indigenous people in our country. It's really important for us to share amongst these two groups because there's lots of strength in the numbers that we can bring together.
I think it's important to be honest and critical with myself because I do recognize that although I didn't live here for a long time, about 10 years, most of my adult or teenage life, coming back here and recognizing, that this is in fact a colonial state through my readings and benefiting from that.
If I go back home and being who I am, I'm still expected to have, I'm duty bound more or less to go out and see the youth and to tell them of my experiences and to steer them in the right way and how my work today does it. It's fantastic. I would have it no other way.
It was only when I left and lived in a different community in Northern Ontario that I, for the first time, made friends with Indigenous youth and Indigenous people. So it's really important to have opportunities for people to connect as human beings. So there are many organizations that facilitate that, but just plainly having community events to bring people together.
I need to really engage with that part of this land, and like the art I've been saying, I need to deconstruct and reconstruct an identity for myself viewed in what is indigenous land.
I don't know if you guys consider yourselves youth, but when I look at you guys, I have a sense of this brightness of the future. I see you guys young and full of energy and ready to go, and you guys will be the next leaders, the next you guys should give yourselves a pat on the back for the types of work you did.